Season 12 has arrived, and it's mostly got a bunch of health nerfs to DPS. Combined with Juno's release and some really decisive changes to supports and tanks, the meta is once again up in the air. So let's get into the best tanks this season. With no radical changes, this patch is a pretty clear-cut tier list. So first up, starting in D tier, is Roadhog. It's been expectedly going downhill for him after getting his healing nerfed 3 times in a row. There are few compositions that don't have the damage to just focus Roadhog for an easy win. When he's not healing, he's super vulnerable and really easy to force back. There are also few maps where Hog has great cover and angles to keep fishing for hooks, but the meta for ground-based brawl tanks has a pretty high damage output right now. It's very easy to just focus Roadhog while mitigating more damage, so you have to hope that the enemy team has an optimal comp for you to play into. And nowadays, that can be pretty rare. Any tank with armor is extra durable to Roadhog's poke, even Winston and Wrecking Ball. The one thing you can play for is the short cooldown of your hook. Now that a lot of heroes are 225 HP, you can get a lot more one-shots easily, and even if you don't get the kill, you can keep disrupting enemy positioning and bursting targets. You'll be pretty effective at taking and holding space for your team. If you're looking to rank up on your favorite heroes, check out the link in the description below to get access to a GameLeap membership. There are tons of guides and courses that can level up your game and help you get better, faster. Make sure to check it out and enjoy the video. Next, we're moving up to C tier with Doomfist. He can be really strong in the right hands, but still suffers from being super counterable. Other dive tanks have an edge in the duel or the diving gauge, and most of the other tanks shrug off his damage while shredding him. Worst things first, he has no armor and gets poked out easily. He also has limited damage into armor, and no way to block stuns and boops from tanks and supports. Every other dive tank has a more reliable neutral. Ball can put up more constant pressure than Doom can, and both Winston and Diva have way better defensive abilities. Bubble and Matrix have always been amazing abilities in their strength and versatility. Power Block is just a way to avoid getting bursted when you run out of mobility. His abilities are still disruptive enough to be annoying at times, but without much burst nor sustained damage, he also doesn't have a strong enough impact in general. The Empowered Punch can be a fight winner, so it's always worth charging, but in the time it takes to set up, it's easy to get outpaced and overwhelmed by tanks that have more ability impact and sustain. On to B tier. In a similar spot is Wrecking Ball. He's better this season, but after a good time with his new upgrades, it's clear that although he can be played, it's just way too difficult to make him work consistently. You have to play a zero mistake and constant value style, dueling, disrupting, slamming rotations, all while making perfect setups with your grapples to keep up with the fight tempo. It's a cool playstyle, but if you miss even a single grapple or stay in the fight for too long, you'll get bursted down into nothingness. Even if you don't die, you'll be forced out until you can heal back up, leaving your team without that constant pressure. Heroes with less health will make Ball a better duelist though. He can really burst heroes down quickly, so you might notice that he's a lot more lethal with his damage. It's just not much to be excited about because a lot of his counters have also gotten better. This patch, Sombra's gotten decent upgrades, and even Torbjorn has more armor. Just like with Doomfist, it's just not an easy playstyle. If you really like the hero, you can push yourself to the limit, but if you're feeling more like ranking up, there are way better options available. Next in B tier is Mauga. He can have a much higher impact than Wrecking Ball or Doomfist, but just like it is for them, it's not easy to achieve in ranked. Mauga is still simple, but after the overdrive duration nerf, the timing of your engages is way less forgiving. A lot of tanks can outspam Mauga with their defensive abilities and equally long range. Now that his sustain is only limited to 3 seconds, it's really hard to consistently make Mauga work. His only real strengths are long-range hitscan pressure, high sustain in his overdrive, and his slam. The area of effect and stun of his overrun are really good, but with only 3 seconds of survivability after slamming in, you can easily die right after. Other tanks aren't as explosive, but they're much less risky and more consistently valuable. Mauga has to choose between a slow and pokey playstyle where he has to run back, or commit everything to blasting forward with a slam and overdrive. They're 2 good choices, but being forced to fully commit so often is really predictable, and it doesn't take much creativity to counter swap against. Moving up to A tier, which is packed with tanks again. First up is Zarya. Her damage has gotten way higher, so she can seriously dominate some tank matchups. Even though heroes like Sigma and Diva are much more versatile than Zarya is, you can really force fast fights that they can't handle when you're at super high energy. And getting high energy is more consistent nowadays. But she's definitely at the bottom of A tier. Even though she's gotten some much needed upgrades, it's come at the cost of 11-second cooldown bubbles. You can get away with it against unaware enemies, but the second you use a single bubble, you can be completely overwhelmed by the right compositions. And unless you can keep consistent damage pressure, even if you get high energy, you'll just run out of bubbles quickly to match the enemy team's abilities. There are also a lot of shields that counter Zarya, Rampart, Winston, and the strongest counter, Reinhardt's 1600 HP. He's up next in A tier. His role is a lot more solidified, and he's amazing at holding corners as well as blocking off entire backlines with his shield. He can consistently handle a lot of poke with his high armor and shield. Not as good as Sigma can, but it's decent for when you're not playing into heroes like Ashe, Junkrat, or Pharah. He has limits, like Lucio or Juno being a must pick for speeding in, but just Juno's presence has definitely made the playstyle more comfortable with 2 options to pick from. Rein as a tank is pretty solidly above average. He has great damage into other tanks in frontline, but limited range. He makes up for it with his high shields, but he still struggles into good teams. He can't play as fast as other brawl tanks like Ramattra or Mauga, but playing too slow means your shield gets broken constantly and your team keeps getting battered. It can definitely be done, and it's not too hard versus what most players pick up until Grandmaster. Just keep some alternatives in your pocket for when you inevitably face the high spam damage teams that surround you and poke hard. Moving on to Junker Queen. She's a lot scarier nowadays with her high sustain. She can do a ton of damage, even to armored tanks, and can really make it uncomfortable to play in the front line. Her knives are a big threat, and even her ultimate has gotten much harder to counter. With no armor, shields, or matrix abilities, she is very counterable though still. At least the unique speed boost utility from the commanding shout can help make a big advantage before the enemy team has time to force you out. She's not the hero to pick for playing slow, so mostly look at your DPS picks to know if you can engage hard. Genji, Venture, and Tracer are solid fast engaging options, while Ashe and Pharah are much slower, leaving you to slowly pick away at stronger front lines, hoping not to get punished. Although slows and stuns really mess up her tempo, her damage has gotten really high, and with more heroes at 225 health this patch, she can get some crazy fast kills, snowballing her bleeding self-heal and rolling over entire teams with her carnage. On to Orisa. With a small but impactful nerf to her javelin direct hit damage, she's a lot more lethal at ranges again. Just an extra 20 bumps the initial damage up to 80, so even if you don't hit the pin into a wall, you're dealing more damage than before. Combined with no fall off on Orisa's primary fire, she's got decent spam and burst again, and although she doesn't have as strong cooldowns as she used to, spin into fortify is impossible for heroes like Ramattra and Reinhardt to get through immediately. The javelin is a bonus, with even more knockback and stun to keep them off your backline. With the new armor, Orisa's poke damage has suffered a lot, but with a higher damage spear, she's better at getting picks on squishies again. If you hit the wall pin and can follow up without getting your damage blocked, you're almost guaranteed the kill. The zero fall off is crazy when put in action. The good thing is that Orisa can still be poked out easier than the top frontline tanks. She just doesn't have that extended staying time, since without a fortify she just has to play so much more carefully so she doesn't suck up all of her team's healing. Moving on to the top 2 in A tier, first is Diva. Her Matrix nerf was deserved. She's clearly gotten to a strong point where she can be a one-size-fits-all dive tank, boosting and bursting enemies quickly or peeling with Matrix as usual. It should be a lot easier to poke Diva out of the fight now, but she's got a ton of armor in yet another season where it's unbelievably strong. The defense Matrix nerf was also just a revert. It was the last in many buffs given to Diva recently. She wasn't really struggling to keep up Matrix in the previous patches anyway. The extra half second just made it constantly available. It was definitely much more than she needed. Now that she's back to usual, she still has all that burst damage and a tighter spread to deal effective damage from safer distances. The less she has to push to get value, the easier it is to sustain that armor and Matrix. For the final hero in A tier, it's Ramattra. He's the solid choice again, but he's not an S tier with the top 2 tanks thanks to Orisa getting better. Ram suffers from getting surrounded just like most brawl tanks do, but his nemesis form punch damage has made it worth pushing fast with. There's just now more of an option to keep him off the enemy team. Forcing your way past the other tank when they want to fight you is tough. Ram is better off slowing them for pushing his own team than making it work aggressively. But with his slow, shield, and piercing punches, he's by far the most consistent tank for rushing and marking front lines. His slow is always effective against anybody caught. Tanks get forced out, and anyone else risks getting one shot by the follow-up damage. He's got such a great combo of offense and defense that he's a safe option for most maps without heavy high ground use. Anything short of Gibraltar or Dorado, and you can spam, block abilities, soak heavy damage and stall, and set up kills all at a good enough level. Now for the top S tier tanks though. With only 2 this season, first up is Sigma. Thanks to his armor breaking damage, he can even handle his counters feasibly well. The only problem he has is a better shield, but every better shield possible, like Reinhardt's and Ramatra's, are also combined with less spam. Sigma wins out the spam game every time. It really makes a massive difference if you're hitting your shots and constantly keeping your health high. Sigma brings the heavy burst damage, the range control, and the shields to enable teammates and block abilities on a regular basis. Sigma's the S tier hero when it comes to frontline fights. Even teams that can quickly rush have to deal with the 120 damage accretion and the constant poke from the Sigma's team. And with Sigma, you only need 1 or 2 swaps, like an Ana, an Ashe, or even a Mei, to completely ward off any type of rush or hard dive attempt. And it's a lot easier to shoot the enemies walking into your space than it is to forcibly try to take it. With that being said, the top S tier hero in the game right now has to be Winston. It can't be ignored how strong he is despite him never being a popular pick in lower ranks. His armor, insanely regular mobility, and historically impactful bubble have finally merged to create a really optimal tank for any rank. Winston wins so many more tank duels nowadays, and he wins any other duel even harder, and he's by far the best tank for blocking and stalling multiple players at once. He can't do 5 for very long, but the 2 supports, or even 3 members of a backline, can be delayed for a meaningful time to allow your team to overwhelm everyone else. The fact that Winston can do this so often, while also providing constant zaps from anywhere on the map, make him even more effective at his job of setting up dives. His secondary fire can help flank duels like Tracer 1v1s or stop flying heroes from pushing up. And even when it comes to bursting backline, his upfront landing damage when he goes with bubble is a lot to deal with. It's been a while since Winston has been so strong so confidently. He's the tank most worthy of practicing right now, but it's still not easy to make him work right off the bat. If you focus mostly on surrounding the enemy team and getting value with your bubble without dying, like blocking off sight lines or stopping abilities, it's easier to get into the optimal playstyle. But with abilities of your own like Dynamite and Biotic Nade in the game on your team, you can also go for some crazy burst kills early in the fight if your team is ready to coordinate. That's it for the best tanks in Season 12. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.